Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, back with another reaction video. Today, we finna react to the NBA's crazy Coke era. So basically, they talk about the 70s and like early to mid 80s, I want to say. Because I think by like 87, 88, I think David Stern, he cleaned house. He cleaned house on all the drug addicts. Anybody in the league that was a drug addict or was known to have a drug addiction, I think David Stern cleared house. And he had like, and this is back when the draft used to have like 5 rounds. So he was trying to fix the NBA with new talent immediately. And I can't say that I blame him, man. You got it. Hey, man. Especially after the Len Bias situation, yeah, you definitely got to clean house on all the druggies, man. Definitely had to. But anyways, though, without further ado, man, let's get right into it.
The 1970s in the NBA were defined by racial tension at an all-time high, violence so bad it threatened the safety of the players, declining ratings driving the NBA to the verge of extinction, but most of all, drugs, and more drugs. While the country was seemingly on a decade-long bender, the magic party powder did not miss the NBA on its run of destruction, peaking at a ridiculous level where upwards of 75% of the NBA were reportedly ripping some booger sugar on the regular. Despite the NBA not wanting you to know about the disaster that was going on behind the scenes, the cocaine era in the NBA resulted in destroyed careers, destroyed lives, the worst basketball in NBA history, complete cultural divide, and even death. The NBA would probably like you to click off here because what I'm going to show you might change the way you look at the history of the league. The 1970s were an ugly time for basketball as the league scrambled for answers following the exit of the rivalry that sparked the success of the whole league. As Wilt and Russell's ultra-marketable battle would leave the successor in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who although in the eyes of most fans and historians alike was the greatest player to ever touch a ball up to that point, Kareem's legacy, marketability, and popularity never seemed to live up to his talent level. There were a few reasons for this. One of them being the lacking of another rival, as Kareem was the clear #1 player, followed by Dr. J, who was a completely different caliber of player at a different position. Kareem's lack of flash and not catering his game to please anyone other than the win column, and lastly, the major down period of league popularity around him. Although not the best face of the league from a marketability perspective, the league was struggling for other reasons. The parity of the NBA with no repeat champs throughout the decade did limit the mainstream popularity. Although assuming by the fact that you're watching a shitty basketball channel with like 25,000 subscribers, you probably are a bigger NBA fan than most and appreciate competition at the highest level. But I'm sure we can agree that if the NBA didn't have dominating runs of teams like Boston and LA, with some of the most recognizable celebrities, let alone athletes in American culture, the NBA would be a shell of what it is. Kinda similar to the WNBA before getting a real face of their league. It wasn't just the lack of an intriguing product that was holding the NBA back, as digging in deeper to the realities and outside perspective of the NBA holds a much darker truth. Some of which was the players' faults. Frequent violence on the floor way further than just the physicality that fans love and miss became all too common for 1970s basketball. The worst of which being instances like Rudy Tomjanovich getting his face shattered in a near lethal blow, a square-off that swung the momentum of a playoff series, and even an old man getting his ass kicked on the floor. The NBA was a sponsor's worst nightmare. Although the on-court drama was bad, the off-court issues, of course, were even worse. Drugs plagued the league at a time where addiction was all too normalized. But what came with the issues the NBA faced was even more controversial. At a decade beginning at the end of the civil rights movement, the 1970s was a new beginning for the country that brought its own set of challenges. As the NBA was dealing with on and off the court issues as a league that's comprised of 75% African Americans, there was a racially motivated negative stigma about the characters that represented the brand.
Wow.
More importantly than some dude's racially motivated disdain was the fact that the NBA players were gambling with their lives and in some cases even other people. One legendary career that the world never got to see unfold came crashing in at the turn of the decade. And had you been around in 1970, I don't think anyone could have predicted the train wreck that was about to unfold, because Spencer Haywood was on top of the world and then some. After qualifying for Team USA out of a junior college, the inspirational start of a monumental career started out with a major bang. As at 20 years old in the ABA, Spencer Haywood may have had the best rookie season I've ever seen, leading the Denver Rockets to the first seed on the back of a 30 points and 20 rebound per game season, taking home Rookie of the Year and the damn MVP trophy in his first season. This truly looked like the start of the next transcendent big man's career. He checked all the boxes for a big guy at a time where size and physicality ruled all, but when pairing it with his incredible incredible touch and finesse, this guy looks like the future of basketball. And as they transitioned to the NBA in his second season, there was really minimal drop-off of the Seattle Supersonics. Averaging 26 points and 13.6 rebounds with a block and a half a game from the ages of 20 to 25, Haywood was a guaranteed all-star that was already one of the best players in the NBA. Only problem was, Seattle was a pretty terrible team. The strange part about this is that after being traded to pair with Bob McAdoo at 25 years old while entering the prime of his career, Spencer Haywood completely fizzled out. After being selected as an all-star every season, excluding his injury-ridden 1971 campaign, Haywood would see a steep statistical decline the second that he stepped in the Big Apple. The reason behind the decline would later become very clear, as Haywood would make a monumental discovery, which was how much he loved doing cocaine. As the snowball grew larger and larger, his numbers would decline further and further, from 19 points a game to 16 points down to 13 points a game. But compared to what comes next, declining stats is still sunshine and rainbows. As the Lakers began building their dynasty with the rookie Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, filling their hole at the power forward position with a once-great big man seemed like a great pennies-on-the-dollar addition if this guy wasn't busy filling his nose instead. The LA lifestyle became too much to handle, as instead of the weekend New York parties that involved a bump here and there, Haywood was now driving his Rolls-Royce down to the beach to go smoke crack instead. Putting together championship squads and drug-addicted power forwards don't exactly go hand in hand. According to Haywood, he was certainly not the only one on this Lakers squad indulging in the drug, but it became clear that his use of the drug was the most severe. During morning practice before Game 3 of the NBA Finals, Spencer Haywood would pass out during stretches at the start of practice. It was no secret that he liked to party a little harder than the next guy, and knowing his issue, his teammates would frantically try waking him up to no success. Fearing the worst, his teammates had assumed that they had just saw their friend die in front of their very eyes, before thankfully Haywood would regain consciousness in the movie-like scene that he created. With his eyes set on taking down the 76ers, Coach Paul Westhead wasn't putting up with the drug-filled nonsense that Haywood was bringing to the team. At the height of their season, Haywood was released from the roster altogether. I wish I could tell you that this was where Haywood would turn his life around, but in drug-filled rage, Spencer Haywood would make a call that almost flipped the world upside down. Taking no accountability for his actions, Haywood placed all of the blame for his misfortunes on the man who punished him. Driving home in his Rolls-Royce the morning after a cocaine bender, thinking Paul Westhead must die, Haywood would reach out to one of his longtime friends who in his words was a real gangster. The two would get cooking, they sat down, found the coach's address, and planned the homicide of his former coach. Thank fucking goodness his mother would talk him out of the dumbest move I've ever heard in my lifetime. Haywood would disappear to play in Italy for 2 years, in which he would receive help for his issues and return to the NBA for 2 seasons, where at least he had his act together, although never returning to anywhere near his former self. Despite being a Hall of Famer, a little bump flipped the script on what looks like an incredibly motivating story. A hardworking kid out of junior college came into the best league in the world and almost etched his name with some of the best to ever do it. But a couple of pipes and lines later, that bright kid would be turned into a homicidal maniac on the verge of doing an irreversible tragedy. I don't think the NBA wants to put that in his bio under his headshot in the Hall of Fame. Spencer Haywood was a dark turnaround for a guy who seemed to be on track for excellence. But in reality, Spencer Haywood wasn't even the most talented career to be destroyed by the NBA's cocaine craze. If you asked Michael Jordan who his basketball inspiration was prior to entering the NBA, what do you think his answer would be? Magic? Bird? Kareem? Maybe even
David
Dr. J?
Thompson.
No. The man that inspired and paved the way for the greatest of all time was none other than the Skywalker David Thompson. To illustrate how much of a stranglehold this young man had in the league upon entering, let's guess the identity of 2 players shown on screen. These are the statistics between 2 players from the age of 21 to 24. One who has been universally accepted as one of the greatest ever, and one who powdered his nose. If you guessed Kobe Bryant to David Thompson, you would be correct. David Thompson was the original ultra-athletic 2-guard that paved the way for guys like MJ and Kobe in his younger days as well. Entering the NBA, this guy no question looked to be the next face of basketball. Going 30-1 in his historic college career, this guy was doing things that no one had ever seen before. Not only was he jumping 4 feet off the ground with vertical nearing 45 inches in the 1970s, but Thompson and his North Carolina teammate actually invented the alley-oop as a centric point in their offense to take advantage of his monumental leaping ability. This guy was a show to watch, and even drew in young Michael Jordan, as even though MJ would of course attend UNC, he grew up a fan of North Carolina State University due to the Showtime 2-guard that played strikingly similar to his airness in later years. The world was excited by the high leaper similar to Zion craze of recent years, but unlike Zion, David Thompson didn't disappoint on any level. As the first overall pick in both the ABA and NBA drafts, David Thompson was taking his talents Nuggets to Denver, where prior to Nikola Jokic, David Thompson was the best talent to ever call the Mile High City his home. Finishing second in MVP voting with near 26 6 and 4 as well as 1.6 steals and 1.2 blocks, David Thompson was instantly one of the best two players on the planet and almost took home a ring in his rookie year, as even with a 42-point explosion from Thompson, Dr. J would take home the win in a matchup that really should have started one of the best friendly rivalries in basketball history. As the NBA and ABA would merge the following season, David Thompson would continue to blossom as one of the best scorers that the NBA had ever seen. With insane vertical separation and a good mid-range jumper to pair, there wasn't very many that could compare as a perimeter scorer at the time. Putting up a combined 26 a game on good efficiency over the next 3 years, it seemed that the all-time great status for Thompson was truly inevitable. Despite failing to build a strong enough supporting core around him in his younger years, the individual dominance of Thompson was incredible to watch. I mean, this guy still is third all-time in single-game scoring after dropping a ridiculous 73 points with no three-point line. As the world was set to watch who should have been the savior of the league blossom, the Denver Nuggets would lock up their star with the highest contract in basketball, paying him $4 million over the next 5 years. Things looked up for Thompson, and even though an injury in the 1980 season would result in him being sidelined for half the year, coming back to average another 25 a game to bounce back made it seem that the ship was smooth sailing. But boy, was that so wrong. With a lot of time on his hands, the Skywalker found his new favorite time killer. Thompson began indulging in cocaine as a way to cope with loneliness for the recovery process and as a way to deal with the pressure that comes with the immense fame and ridiculous expectations with being the richest dude in the NBA. David wasn't here for the money and fame that comes along with being one of the best players in the world. He was a quiet Christian kid who, in his word, didn't play basketball. He was a basketball player. As he lost his faith and lost basketball that was essentially his identity as a man, the only thing that he could use to cope was the magic powder. As all seemed to be going well in 1981 with a bounce-back season, 1982 was a completely different story. Putting up just 15 a game for the Nuggets, Thompson would be moved to the bench at 27 years old in what should have been the prime of his career. Due to ridicule from cashing the biggest checks in the NBA on the bench and the self-disappointment from his declining play, Thompson's fun coping mechanism would snowball into full-blown addiction. As the worse he played, the more he used, and the more he used, the worse he played, Thompson would be moved to Seattle in the following season, where although his stats had dropped significantly from his peak, an early season run would earn him one more All-Star selection, averaging 16 points a game for the year. And sadly, this was really the last we'd ever see of David Thompson in the NBA. Just 19 games into the 1984 season at 29 years old, Thompson found himself back into a declining role as his play significantly fell every game it felt like. Frequent in clubs more so than the practice facility, this would be the last stop of Thompson's career, as after getting into a fight in a New York nightclub, Thompson would fall down the stairs and suffer a career-ending knee injury that completely took the bird out of the sky. Trying to rebound with any role that he could get, Thompson was cut from the Indiana Pacers before going on a drug-filled bender which concluded in him being arrested for public intoxication. The kid who knew nothing more than playing basketball had just seen his life completely spiral out of control. Just a few years after signing the biggest deal in basketball, Thompson was spending $1,000 a day on cocaine, which resulted in a 1986 bankruptcy. With no money, no job, a destroyed reputation, and no credibility after fumbling a golden goose opportunity, Thompson would see his darkest days after being locked up for 180 days for assaulting his wife in 1987. The reality of this nightmare hadn't really settled in until while sitting in jail, a TV segment would play honoring Dr. J on his brilliant career after announcing his retirement. 9 years after their matchup in his rookie season, when speaking on the best players he had the honor of matching up against, David Thompson was the first name that he said. Despite being subject to an applause by the whole room, Thompson's reality finally clicked. He was no longer the Skywalker. His friend and counterpart in the league was being honored on national television for a legendary career while he was sitting in jail broke and hopeless. After reaching rock bottom, I'm glad to say at least Thompson managed to build a life for himself after fumbling what should have been an all-time great NBA career, as after reverting back to Christianity in jail, Thompson remained sober with a healthy family to this day. Although Thompson's career never lived up to what it should have been, he still seems rather respected for his excellence as a trailblazer in the league that only a few really got to appreciate. The same cannot be said for Michael Ray Richardson, who showed no decency in his ugly exit from the NBA. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about Michael Ray Richardson's game. Nicknamed Sugar Ray for his sweet moves, a long and athletic 6'5" 6'5" guard with fantastic defensive instincts, really had everything he needed to be one of the greatest guards of all time. Hell, the actual greatest point of all time, Magic Johnson, said he played exactly like him, and from the eye test alone, you can tell he was right. After a dramatic upswing in production through 4 collegiate seasons at Montana, Sugar Ray was itching to prove himself at the NBA level big time. Playing under Red Holzman, who was notorious for not playing rookies, Richardson would start his career poorly at 6-3-3 in 16 minutes a game, shooting really inefficiently. Although Richardson was already a pretty elite defender with a steal and a half in his limited playing time, New York Knicks fans were quick to write off the underperforming rookie as a bust. But once given the opportunity to succeed, he quickly shut them the hell up. 15 points with a league-leading 10 assists and 3 steals a game in his all-star sophomore season on much improved efficiency, Michael Ray Richardson was the overnight savior of the New York Knicks. Proving he should, more so than demanding to play, caused a quick turnaround from bust to future cornerstone piece. And at this time, Richardson was enjoying every minute of it. As a kid who had just spent 4 years playing in Montana, being the center of attention in the biggest city in America stroked his ego in a way that he couldn't get enough of. As similar to many college-aged kids and young adults, his addictive personality and need to be liked would continually surround him with the wrong people doing the wrong things. Of course, the consequences of these types of actions are not seen immediately, but there's no hiding from inevitability. Richardson would frequent bars and clubs and dabble in recreational drug use from time to time. Similar to a typical college kid, he's just having fun with friends, meeting girls, and doing what it seemed like everyone else was doing at the time. And in the moment, there were essentially zero repercussions. Richardson would continue to see his upswing in production into his 3rd and beginning of his 4th season in the league, essentially being a baby Magic Johnson who may have been a little quicker while being the best perimeter defender at his position. Even Larry Bird said outside of Magic, Sugar Ray was the sweetest point guard in the league. It wasn't an overnight collapse for Richardson in the NBA as a hardworking young point with all of the talent in the world. However, his drug use and casual partying got less and less casual. His upswing in production plateaued before starting to creep down in the other direction in the 82 season. And after Elsman, who had earned Richardson respect and vice versa, was fired from the team, Richardson's New York ties got a lot looser. New coach Hubby Brown wasn't so entertained by the young fun guard whose party habits had began affecting his on-court production. Richardson would be moved in the following season to Golden State for Bernard King, who ironically would see an even worse spiral due to drugs and alcohol that caused numerous dangerous, violent, and sexual crimes, including drunk driving, resisting arrest, and sexual assault, being so high he couldn't remember a single detail. Yeah, the NBA really was flipped upside down at this time. But for Michael Ray Richardson, there wasn't exactly a light at the end of the tunnel either. Although being a hardworking guard, his own attitude and life decisions over a prolonged period of time would result in his downfall. Even after being traded, the guy refused to give up the NYC lifestyle and camped out until the Warriors would send a coach to Richardson to renegotiate his contract and give him a fresh start in Golden State. With a new beginning, Richardson immediately ruined it as he spiraled out of control as less of a party boy and more of a drug-addicted cancer to the team, as his hobby became an addiction and his play would plummet dramatically from 18 to 12 points a game, and he now was a hot-headed menace getting in fights with coaches and teammates. The Warriors would get rid of their newly acquired all-star just 33 games into the Michael Ray Richardson experience.
Damn.
Richardson was no longer that fun, new, exciting point guard. He was now a drug-addicted and financially ruined paycheck-to-paycheck millionaire after spending all his money on drugs and his 16 cars. He reportedly had numerous people hunting him down on the East Coast for money that he owed to them. But after being traded back to the New York area on the New Jersey Nets, the problems reached their peak. Now visiting nightly crack houses instead of clubs and parties, Richardson's play had steeply declined. He was in and out of rehab facilities, and as David Stern had stepped up as the commissioner of the league, Richardson was banned after the 83-84 campaign due to a positive drug test. After getting his life on track, Richardson would be blessed with a rule change the following season allowing for a 3-strike system to be put into place. Stern's early 1980s introduction to the NBA came at a time where, as we've learned so far, was in desperate need of a cleanup, and with his plan, gave the opportunity for players to help themselves get clean with a paid rehabilitation after strike 1, an unpaid rehab after strike 2, and a banning from the NBA if you refuse to help yourself for strike 3. Having dealt with his own issues to an extent, Richardson's rehab visits had seemingly helped him bounce back in a major way with his best season in the NBA in the 85 season. At 25-8 with 3 steals a game, the young gun energizer was seemingly back and better than ever. When all was looking up with a new child, a comeback player of the year award, and an all-star selection, a relapse would sadly give Richardson his 2nd strike. And with his progress he made essentially wiped out, Richardson would be notified of his 3rd drug suspension just 20 days after in 1986. Michael Ray Richardson was officially banned from the NBA for life. After this point, Richardson would never touch an NBA floor again, with disdain for the way that the NBA treated him, but in reality, Sugar Ray had as many chances as anyone and disappointed us all time and time again. Although complaining about Stern's harsh penalties as just the second player to receive this ban, the measures that Stern went to clean up the NBA would be validated in the months to follow, as the behind-the-scenes disaster that cocaine was causing in the NBA would be blasted to the mainstream. Just 4 months after the banning of Sugar Ray, the world would be shocked to learn about the passing of Len Bias the night of his second overall draft selection in 1986. After returning to college with a new $1 million Reebok deal and a multi-million-dollar NBA contract, Len, as he had done before, celebrated by ripping blow with his former teammates late into the night. 4 hours into the party, disaster struck as Len Bias would seize up in his former dorm room, before being rushed to the emergency room just a bit too late. The world was shocked to say the least, as 11,000 people would watch the 22-year-old be laid to rest. This was bigger than basketball at this point, as it wasn't just affecting bums on the street. This was a young, successful, and healthy man who had just lost his life due to one poor decision. The severity of the issue actually played a hand in the US launching a war on drugs, which was completely disastrous, but also fueled David Stern's motives to clean up the league, as the secret was now out. These guys had just smashed the emergency button. More so than the loss of careers, Stern's anti-drug wave would have an immediate impact on the power structure of the NBA. Just a few days before the passing of Len Bias, Larry Bird and the Celtics would celebrate their third trip of the decade, beating out the Twin Tower Rockets, who really sat in a position similar to Bird, McHale, and Parrish in their earlier days. But honestly, it wouldn't be crazy to say that this young Rockets core had even more talent. With 2 of the greatest talents to ever grace the front court, the Rockets should have been on a violent upswing at the tail end of the 1980s. But in reality, the decisions of a few, along with unlucky injuries, would completely derail the best young team out west. The two-guard pairing of Lewis Lloyd and Mitchell Wiggins added crucial perimeter help that the Rockets needed to round out this championship-level roster. At 17 points per game and 11 points per game on the Western Conference champions, these guys were no slouches. The two were known as friendly rivals, competing at the position, but more so best friends. A bit detached from the rest of the team, the two would get after it hard in practice to the point where you could call this the best shooting guard duo in the league, outside of MJ and whoever the hell backed him up. But as hard as they went on the court, they went even harder off of it. Often visiting some of the more shady bars and clubs around Houston at a time where the nightlife industry in the city was prosperous, the two had distanced themselves from the rest of their team and found themselves in some bad positions with all the wrong people. Although mostly undocumented and speculative, the night that their worlds fell apart came 32 games into the 1987 season. As after exiting the club on what was just any other night, a stranger came up to the two as a fan of the team, offering them a bump of the best shit they could find. And boy, they had to try that shit out. After a night of partying early into the morning, the two would be called into private the following day as the NBA was given an anonymous tip that the shooting guard pair may have been indulging in some extracurriculars. As word got out that the two had failed the drug test, the world was shocked to see that on their first strike, the commissioner had made an example out of them, banning them for life from the NBA. This wasn't just any other team. This is the modern day equivalent of Lively and Gafford being booted from the NBA after their finals run while on top of the world just out of the blue. With a laundry list of all-time talents destroyed by the drug, numerous players banned and potential dynasties broken up, just a few years later, and it's safe to say that Commissioner David Stern had successfully ridded the NBA of their cocaine epidemic. The man deserves all the credit in the world because when looking back, I don't think people realize how dark these days really were. Cocaine is a drug that can make you feel like anything is possible until the effects wear off, leaving the craving to feel like Superman once again. As the bodies hit the floor, the NBA really desperately needed a cleanup and a shifting of the focus on the NBA into what made it so great in the first place. David Stern took a league filled with crime, violence, and racial tension and put the focus back on the players who brought it to the top, getting them the money they earned, treating them like shareholders more so than employees, and elevating the NBA to bigger and better heights. It's also safe to say that the 1980s drafting of the best sports rivalry in history may have played a hand in that. Check out my video here covering the infamous Larry Bird and Magic Johnson saga if you haven't already, and as always, I'll see.
Alrighty, man, that's just gonna about do it for this one, man. A lot of these dudes did it to themselves, man. They had opportunities to get right, but they just couldn't get right. So much great talent, though, man. But it sucks that drugs overtook what they could have been, especially Len Bias. Len Bias is the biggest what if in NBA history, bro. But it's with that shit. It is what it is, though, man. Anyway, so that's just gonna about do it for this one, man. I will see you all in the next video. Till then. All right, peace out.